it's hard to navigate the grocery store. Basically, there's problems in everything. And how do you figure out what the problems are? You can't even figure it out from reading the side of the package. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Because it's not what's in the food, it's what's been done to the food. And they don't put that on the label. If you want to learn about obesity, just get on a scale. That's not the issue. The issue is, are you metabolically healthy?
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, my guest on Longevity Roadmap is Dr. Robert H. Lustig. He's a renowned pediatric endocrinologist and professor emeritus at my old alma mater, the University of California, San Francisco. He specializes in neuroendocrinology, childhood obesity, and the effects of sugar on health. Dr. Lustig received his MD from Cornell in 1980 and did his pediatric residency at St. Louis Children's Hospital. He later earned a Master's of Law from UC Hastings College of Law in 2013. He's a leading voice in public health and has authored several peer-reviewed papers, reviews, and influential books. And the latest book is Metabolical: The Lure and the Lies of Processed Food, Nutrition, and Modern Medicine, published in 2021. Currently, Dr. Lustig serves as Chief Science Officer of the nonprofit Eat Real and is a member of the Nutrition Task Force of the American Dental Association. Welcome to the show, Dr. Lustig. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me, Buck. Appreciate it.
Great. Well, right off the bat, let's get into, you got lots of stuff here to talk about. You've been very vocal about a lot of these issues and have made them, made the public aware of them. One of them is that you've stated that only 7% of Americans are metabolically healthy, while 93% suffer from some sort of metabolic dysfunction. Let's start with this, just so we're kind of all on the same page. How do you define metabolic dysfunction?
Well, metabolic dysfunction, for all intents and purposes, mean defective or dysfunctional mitochondria. Now, what are mitochondria, you might ask? I mean, yeah. I know but the audience, they might have heard of it, in Biology 101, from 10th grade, but probably haven't heard of it since. Mitochondria are the little energy burning factories inside each of your cells. Basically, their job is to convert the chemical energy in food into chemical energy that your body can use to power all of the various functions that have to take place, whether it be locomotion, whether it be neurotransmission, whether it be metabolic phenomena inside the cell, whether it be growth, whether it be generating energy for heat. There are thousands of different reactions, and they are all accomplished through a molecule. And that molecule is called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. The energy is in the phosphate bonds. And so the mitochondria are designed to take energy from the outside world and turn it into ATP that your cell can use. So your cell can't use a protein for energy. Your cell can't use a fat for energy. Your cell can't use a carbohydrate for energy unless it is turned into ATP first. It is estimated that each of us turn over 68 million pounds of ATP every single day. How's that? Okay, wow. Because it is just going on constantly. So you're making it, you're breaking it down, you're releasing the energy gets captured and powers various phenomena within each cell, which ultimately allows you to be alive. So this is a pretty goddamn important phenomenon, turning food energy into ATP. Well, you have to do it at peak efficiency. You have to do it at 100% efficiency. If you burn energy, if your mitochondria are only at 99% efficiency, that means that 1% of all of the energy that comes into your body is not being utilized properly. So if you just go from 100% to 99%, you're already exhibiting metabolic dysfunction. And if you go down to 98%, you're exhibiting even more. Well, that energy has to go somewhere. And it ends up being turned into fat. And so the obesity epidemic, the diabetes epidemic, the cancer epidemic, the dementia epidemic are all manifestations of mitochondrial dysfunction. And so, for whatever reason, each of us have something that is affecting our mitochondria in some negative fashion. And it didn't used to be this way, but it is now. And so the question is, what made that happen?
Right. And I guess that's the next question. And this is where, a lot of what you're studying, what you're talking about comes in. Talk a little bit, obviously what the next topic is, well, why do we have that dysfunction? The topic obviously goes towards sugar, particularly fructose.
Well, that's the big kahuna. It's not the only kahuna. There are a few others. I mean, things like ionizing radiation, things like air pollution, chemicals in the environment. There are a whole host of different things that ultimately contribute to mitochondrial dysfunction in various ways.
Right.
And different people are
even in aging
to
too.
those.
I mean, aging itself.
Oh, absolutely in aging. No question.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that ties all of these together is a phenomenon that you well know as a surgeon, and the audience may have heard of, but probably don't know what it means, is called oxidative stress or reactive oxygen species. So you need oxygen. Obviously, you can't power the ATP generation without it. But the fact is that as a matter of course, those mitochondria throw off little oxygen radicals. Okay, like little hydrogen peroxides inside the cell.
Mm-hmm.
And those can do damage unless they're quenched. Now, the quenching usually occurs through an antioxidant. So that antioxidant can be anything from vitamin C to vitamin E to glutathione in the liver, which is a super important one. Bottom line is you have to have enough antioxidants for the reactive oxygen species you make.
Right.
And normally when you're eating a decent diet, you do.
Yeah.
But when you're eating an ultra-processed food diet, those antioxidants have been removed. And one of the reasons they've been removed is because they don't taste very good.
Interesting.
And so the food industry has actually removed something that was helpful. And the other thing is that those antioxidants are easily oxidized themselves just by sitting on the shelf. And so by removing them, they can sell the product for longer, though they won't go rancid because they've been removed. But the problem is that means that we end up antioxidant deficient. A perfect example of this is a whole grain. People say, oh, you have to eat your whole grains. Well, you don't have to, but if you're going to eat carbohydrate, you should eat it as whole grains. Why? Well, because there are three parts to the whole grain. There is the starch. Okay, fine. There is the fiber, the husk that surrounds the whole grain, which turns out to have its own benefits in terms of GI health and in terms of metabolic health and turning into butyrate so that you can suppress inflammation. But also you have the third part of the whole grain called the germ, wheat germ, for instance. Now, my mother, okay, God bless her soul, made me snarf down a tablespoon of wheat germ every day when I was a kid. Kretschmer's wheat germ. I hated it. It was disgusting. All right? But in fact, the antioxidants and the micronutrients and all the things that actually made that whole grain worth eating were in the germ.
Yeah.
Okay? And so it actually made sense. And I have forgiven my mother for her indiscretions, but nonetheless, you don't see that anymore.
Yeah.
So the fact of the matter is, by consuming ultra-processed food with the germ removed, we are actually micronutrient deficient, and this is also contributing to the metabolic dysfunction.
Yeah, and I think you've said that 73%, I think, is the number of the U.S. food supply consisting of ultra-processed foods. One of the questions I was going to ask you, because I don't think it's entirely clear. I mean, even to me, frankly, like what exactly processed food is, and there's different levels of processed food, and we're just we go to the grocery store and a lot of people, including myself, probably don't really have a really good sense. I mean, some of them are obvious, right? Well, Oreo cookies are going to be bad for you, but some things are going to be less obvious. Could you help us try to get a sense of like what is processed, what's not?
So this is actually a debate that's going on within nutrition right now. Is what is processed, what is not, and what is ultra processed and what is not, and how do you define it? And are all ultra processed foods bad? Are there some that might be good, etc.? This is a very complicated space at the moment. So I'm going to try to do my best to try to, sort of guide you through the peaks and the valleys here. All right. The easiest way to explain processing is with an example. Now, my colleague, Dr. Carlos Monteiro, who is a professor of public health at the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, did us all a very great service by developing a classification system for food processing, which I think is way more important than what is in the food is actually what's been done to the food, the degree of food processing. And so Carlos developed this system. It's called the NOVA system, N-O-V-A, just means Portuguese for new. Okay, it's the new system. And the easiest way to explain the NOVA system is with an example. So let's take an apple. So NOVA class, there are 4 classes. NOVA class 1 would be an apple picked off a tree. NOVA class 2 would be apple slices, destemmed, deseeded, maybe deskinned. NOVA class 3 would be apple sauce. So macerated, possibly cooked, possibly with food added to prevent oxidation, maybe with a little extra added sugar, possibly, but possibly not. And finally, NOVA class 4 would be a McDonald's apple pie. And the question is, how much of that NOVA class 1 apple is in that McDonald's class 4 apple pie? And the answer is not a whole lot. Right? Not a whole lot. Okay. They can all say they're apple, but they're not really.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the point. So the question is, of the various NOVA classes, which ones predict disease? And the answer is only the NOVA class 4. Only NOVA class 4 predicts disease, but it predicts every chronic metabolic disease. It predicts obesity, it predicts diabetes, it predicts hypertension, it predicts cardiovascular disease, it predicts cancer, it predicts dementia, it predicts depression, it predicts polycystic ovarian disease, it predicts fatty liver disease, it predicts early mortality in numerous data sets taken from around the world.
So what is it, Dr. Lustig, that, outside of removing, I know you spent some time talking about antioxidants, but what else is unique about NOVA class 4 food that causes these problems?
That's a very good question. So as a separate exercise, for the last 5 years, I have been engaged with a group of other scientists in an attempt to try to help a processed food company achieve metabolic health with their products. We have actually taken a dietarily unhealthy company and turned it into a dietarily healthy company. Now, this company is in the Middle East. It is not here in the United States. It is like the Nestle of the Middle East. The name of the company is Kuwaiti Danish Dairy Company, KDD. And 5 years ago, they approached me and said, we understand that we are part of the problem. We want to be part of the solution. The diabetes rate in Kuwait is 18% and the obesity rate is 80%. And we do not want to be responsible for, the decline in health in the Middle East. We want to be the solution. Can you help us? And so I helped form the scientific advisory team. And over the course of the next 4 years, we analyzed every single aspect of KDD's ingredients, in their processes, and in their products. We tested every single item they got from any vendor from around the world to make sure that what the vendor said was in it was actually in it and not other things, okay? Because there's often food fraud, especially with powders and, things that you get from other countries. We submitted all of their products to biochemical analysis to see if something was gained or lost in the process of the processing, so that we could ultimately determine what ingredients were okay and which ones were not, which processes within KDD's own walls were okay and which were not, and which products needed, shall we say, either a revamping or a re-engineering or had to be discontinued entirely. And to KDD's credit, they have taken our report, a very large report, and they have, over the last year, turned over and re-engineered 10% of their portfolio, 18 items, okay, out of 180, to be metabolically healthy. And we have tested those to show that they are now metabolically healthy, especially compared to the previous iteration. So, for instance, their chocolate milk, their chocolate ice cream, as examples. Okay, they now have an espresso shot that confers health instead of taking it away. Okay, et cetera, et cetera. So, and the question is, what did we find? What is it that we identified as being the problem in ultra-processed food? And I can say that there were four things that ultimately determined whether or not their products were healthy or unhealthy. And we published this, by the way, in Frontiers in Nutrition in 2023.
Okay.
Here are the four. Too much sugar, too little fiber, too little omega-3 fatty acids, and too many emulsifiers. Those were the four things that conferred metabolic dysfunction across the board.
What are some examples of emulsifiers if people are looking for, signs of that? And
emulsifiers are what hold fat and water together. Okay. So the most common place you find an emulsifier in your house is in your clothes washer. It's Tide. Okay.
Yeah.
It lifts stains out of your clothes. And the reason is because it holds the fat and water together. So it allows the fat and the stain, to basically be extricated from the fabric and go out with the water. That's what an emulsifier is. It's a detergent. Okay. That's what emulsifiers are. They are detergents. So what happens when you swallow a detergent? You burn a hole in your intestine is what happens. Now, obviously, these are weak detergents that are in food as opposed to strong detergents that are in, Tide, but they ultimately do the same thing. And what they do is they strip the mucin layer right off the intestinal epithelial surface, exposing those enterocytes in the intestinal cells to the junk in your intestinal lumen, and that ultimately leads to gut inflammation, which leads to systemic inflammation, which leads to insulin resistance and chronic metabolic disease, i.e. mitochondrial dysfunction. So keeping your intestine whole and intact and functional is job one. And emulsifiers actually hurt that. They destroy that.
What kind of food do you see in?
Basically, virtually everything in the grocery store is, that is ultra processed has emulsifiers. And the reason is for shelf life, because that basically holds the fat and the water together. So anything from a microwave lasagna, because if you put a microwave lasagna in without emulsifiers into the microwave, the heat's going to then separate the fat and the water, and the fat's going to rise and the water's going to go down because of the density, and you're going to end up with a gamish instead of a lasagna. So there are emulsifiers in virtually everything that's ultra processed at some level. So this is a problem. So how do you know if something has emulsifiers? The most common emulsifier that's used in ultra processed food is called E471. And the name that they put on the side of the package, because they would never put E471 because, people would automatically say, oh, I'm not buying that. They put mono and diglycidyl esters. That's the key. That's the code for emulsifiers, for industrial emulsifiers. There are others. Lecithin is an emulsifier. Polysorbate 80 carboxymethylcellulose, tween. These are all emulsifiers that are used in various ultra-processed foods. And they are carrageenan. Okay, carrageenan is a big one because that's what's in ice cream. That's what makes ice cream fluffy. Do you know who introduced carrageenan to ice cream?
Ben and Jerry.
Nope. Margaret Thatcher.
Margaret Thatcher. Okay.
She was an ice cream chemist before she was an MP.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, she was the Iron Lady, all right. Bottom line, all of these things are not so good for you. So too much sugar, because the sugar hurts the liver. Not enough fiber, because the fiber protects the gut. Not enough omega-3s, because the omega-3s support the brain. And too many emulsifiers, because the emulsifiers cause the inflammation that drives all of these. So could you develop ultra-processed food that deals with all four of those in a rational, meaningful way? And could you then make ultra-processed food healthy? Well, that is exactly what we are doing in Kuwait. Could that be done here in the United States? And the answer is absolutely, if the food industry wanted to. And that's what we're in the process of trying to get them to understand right now.
My understanding of at least the way I thought about metabolic dysfunction and what causes metabolic syndrome, ultimately, I tend to just focus onto the glucose pathways and fructose, and specifically looking at, the insulin response.
Yep.
And hyperinsulinemia.
Hyperinsulinemia is the marker of metabolic dysfunction.
Got it. Can you get hyperinsulinemia with just these other processed foods that are not necessarily just the sugar and the fructose?
Absolutely.
You can.
Absolutely. So the thing that, as a, clinician and as a scientist, that you have learned is that the important features of insulin resistance are the muscle fat and maybe the liver fat, but mostly the muscle fat. And the muscle fat is important, and I'm not saying it's not. It is important. Jerry Shulman from Yale University School of Medicine has basically outlined the entire process of how carbohydrate, excess glucose, ultimately gets transported to the muscle, gets turned into fat, and then that fat ends up going back to the liver. And so that is one pathway to insulin resistance, and it can be achieved with standard polymerized carbohydrate starch. Okay? That is absolutely one pathway.
And that's the one we learn, I guess, right? I mean,
but that's the one we learn. That's the one we learn. The one we don't learn is that you can bypass that. You can basically go straight to the liver and cause liver dysfunction right off the bat, because sugar, and in particular the molecule fructose, is actually handled only by the liver. In the same way alcohol is metabolized, so is fructose. And so they both overwhelm the mitochondria. They both end up throwing off the excess as fat. And that's why we have fatty liver disease in children. And that's why children now get the diseases of alcohol without alcohol, is because of what's happening to sugar at the level of the liver, because alcohol and sugar do the same thing. And that's why fatty liver disease is now so prevalent. Not because of the carbohydrate, the starch, that causes the muscle fat, but the liver fat. And that's bypassing it and going directly to the liver. You don't even need the muscle to do that. And that's one of the reasons why even thin people have metabolic dysfunction, not just fat people. So, Jerry's right. He's just only half right, because he leaves out that entire other pathway. He was just here at UCSF 2 months ago, gave a named lectureship from my ex-boss, Walter Miller, whom you may remember, giant in the field of pediatric endocrinology,
sure,
especially steroid metabolism. And Jerry basically told the entire story of, what happens to carbohydrate in terms of this shuttle between, the body, the adipose, the muscle, and back to the liver. And I asked him a question. I said, how does fructose fit into that? He said, well, fructose is a whole nother story. Yeah, he doesn't tell that story. I'm telling that story.
What about these other things that we talked about before that are outside of fructose and this classic glucose pathway? Are those also directly affecting the liver, creating damage?
One of those, for instance, are branched chain amino acids. Now, as a surgeon, you know that you need branched chain amino acids. They are essential amino acids, so you have to consume them. Your body cannot make them. The three branched chain amino acids are leucine, isoleucine, and valine. They are essential. They are 20% of muscle. 3 amino acids are 20% of muscle. I mean, when you think about it, that's pretty severe because there are 20 different amino acids, yet only 3 of them constitute 1/5 of muscle. So they are well overrepresented in muscle. And that is why the bodybuilders, they're consuming protein powder, which is branched chain amino acids. That's what they are. And if you're building muscle, if you're a bodybuilder and you're pumping iron, you need them. No argument. You won't make more muscle without them. On the other hand, what if you're not a bodybuilder? What if you're a mere mortal like me, okay, and you consume excess branched chain amino acids? What happens to them? There's no place to put them. There's no storage for them other than muscle. And if you're not making the muscle and you need the exercise to make the muscle, okay, what happens to them? Well, they go to the liver. The liver takes the amino group off. Now they become branched chain organic acids. And then the liver tries to put them into the Krebs cycle, the TCA cycle, in order to burn them. Well, that's how the mitochondria get overwhelmed. And then the mitochondria have to take the excess and throw them off as fat. And now you got fatty liver. So consuming excess branched chain amino acids will also do this. This is work from Chris Newgard at Duke University demonstrating this. And well, the fact of the matter is, that's everything that's corn-fed, because corn is exceedingly high in branched chain amino acids. And that is why we feed our cattle corn. That's why we feed our pigs corn. That's why we feed our fish corn. Okay?
Yeah.
In this country. And the reason is because it makes them fatter so that they can get to slaughter sooner to increase cash flow. All that marbling in the meat you see in the case, in the store, okay? We prize that marbling because that's fat and that's what makes it taste good. That's flavor. Yeah, that's metabolic syndrome. The animal has metabolic syndrome because of what they ate. Well, that's the same thing that's happening to you.
So hyperinsulinemia can also be caused by these other pathways, not the classic glucose pathway. Explain, if you would, just the mechanism of actual increase in insulin.
Whenever you have mitochondrial dysfunction,
Uh-huh.
okay, your insulin is going to go up because your insulin's trying to then take the excess that the mitochondria can't deal with and deposit it somewhere. So it is a result of the mitochondrial dysfunction. And it is the closest thing to the mitochondria. I mean, if you could do mitochondrial biopsies on everybody, reach in and grab some muscle and pull some mitochondria out of it and measure mitochondrial function, you would see it. But, the IRB frowns upon that. That's kind of a little, over the top. So we need some method for being able to assess mitochondrial function that doesn't require a biopsy. Well, the next thing downstream from your mitochondria is your insulin. And so I think that fasting insulin is the single most important screening tool to assess metabolic pathology, to determine whether or not you have metabolic dysfunction or not. Now, here's the problem. Fasting insulin is very easy to do. And it's not expensive. It's cheap. I mean, it can be anywhere from $12 to $120, depending on who's doing it. Okay. On average, it's about $40. Okay. It's not very expensive. And it gives you, I think, a lot of information. I think that fasting insulin is the single most important lab test that you can have done. But the American Diabetes Association does not want you drawing a fasting insulin. On their website, they very specifically say, do not draw fasting insulin. So how come they say, don't draw it, and I say it's the most important test you can have? How can they both be right? Well, the answer is because they're not right. That's why, and I am. Why? They'd say, don't draw fasting insulin for the following two reasons. And both of them are true, and unrelated. They're both specious. Okay? What they say is correct, but it doesn't matter. And here's why. Reason number one, they say don't draw fasting insulin because insulin assays are not standardized across platforms. There are different ways to do that fasting insulin. That's why it's $12 all the way to up to $120. Okay? Depends on who's doing it and depends on which machine you're doing it on. It depends what method you're using. A lot of the cheap assays, you use radioimmunoassay or ELISA, enzyme-linked immunosorbent assays. Okay? Those use antibodies, and antibodies can bind cross-reactants, okay? And there are cross-reactants that you can measure in the blood. The most common cross-reactant to insulin is proinsulin. So proinsulin is the precursor to insulin. Your pancreas, as you know, makes a peptide called proinsulin. And then there's an enzyme that cleaves the proinsulin and cleaves this piece called C-peptide out of the proinsulin. And then you have the mature insulin. And that is what gets released into the bloodstream. So if you're metabolically healthy, your insulin level will be whatever it is, and your proinsulin level should be 0 because you're not releasing that. However, the more stress your pancreatic beta cells are under, the harder they have to work. The more likely they're going to end up not having the time to take that proinsulin and cut that C-peptide out. And also, as the blood glucose starts to rise, they're under a lot of pressure to try to bring that blood glucose down. And so they're going to start releasing stuff before it's ready. Okay? Not ready for prime time proinsulin. And so you get proinsulin in the blood. You get hyperproinsulinemia. Okay, this was work done by John S. Yudkin in Britain many, many years ago. And that proinsulin will cross-react in the insulin assay because it looks a lot like insulin because it's the precursor.
You kind of want to know that anyway, though, right?
That's right. Exactly. You want to know that anyway. And so they say, don't draw it because you might be measuring cross-reactants. I say, hey, look, if it's high, you got a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you stick with the same assay, you can use that number anyway to demonstrate benefit of whatever therapy you're trying to employ for that patient. So that's the first reason why they're wrong. Now, the second reason they're wrong, they say fasting insulin levels do not correlate with obesity. That is also true. I agree. They do not. There are plenty of fat people who are healthy, and there are plenty of thin people who are sick because fasting insulin does not correlate with obesity. It correlates with metabolic health. It correlates with mitochondrial dysfunction. And there are plenty of thin people with mitochondrial dysfunction. There are plenty of thin people with fatty liver disease. There are also overweight people, obese people who are metabolically healthy. We have a name for them, MHO, metabolically healthy obese. They will live a completely normal life, die at a completely normal age, not cost the taxpayer a dime. They're just fat. Okay? And their mitochondria are working. And so a fasting insulin doesn't tell you about obesity. In fact, why would we want it to tell you about obesity? If you wanted to learn about obesity, just get on a scale.
Yeah.
That's not the issue. The issue is, are you metabolically healthy? And a fasting insulin will tell you that.
The association, obviously there is one, but maybe you can kind of talk to hyperinsulinemia and systemic inflammation.
So the question is, where did the insulin resistance come from? And it can come from two places. It can come from the liver being sick because of fat, like we just talked about, like fructose, or it can come from systemic inflammation. It can come from your body being inflamed. And we know that this is true because you can measure it in the high sensitivity C-reactive protein level. Okay. And the question is, all right, if you're systemically inflamed, how come? Okay. Now, obviously, if you have an autoimmune disease, that's a good reason. But only about 10 to 15% of people have autoimmune diseases, but 93% of people are metabolically dysfunctional. Where did they get their inflammation from? And the answer is almost always, not always, but almost always, the gut inflammation. And this is why the story of the microbiome is becoming so important and trying to understand how the microbiome interacts with the rest of the body. Because if your intestine is not functioning as a barrier to that microbiome, stuff's going to leak across. We have a name for this. It's called leaky gut. So the way to think about this is your intestine is a sewer. Okay, what's a sewer? It's a pipe with you-know-what in it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a sewer. Right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, your intestine is a pipe with you-know-what in it. Now, the intestine has 3 barriers to keep the you-know-what out of your bloodstream. Okay, what are those 3 barriers? First barrier is the physical barrier. That's the mucin layer that we talked about before that coats the inside of your intestinal epithelial cells. Well, if you don't feed your microbiome will feed on you. It will strip that mucin layer right off the intestinal epithelial cells, exposing those intestinal cells to all the junk and thereby generating gut inflammation. Almost assuredly, this is what is happening in irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel disease, which more and more people are getting. Okay. In addition, you can have the emulsifiers working on that as well. So ultra-processed food is going to generate that gut inflammation because of changes in the mucin layer. So that's that's barrier number 1 that has been abrogated. Barrier number two. Okay, there is a biochemical barrier. Okay, and these are proteins that hold the intestinal epithelial cells together. We call them tight junction proteins. Okay, the most famous of this is zonulins that are defective in celiac disease. Okay, and we understand those. Turns out zonulins, you can destroy them, with an antigen like gluten if you have celiac, but you can nitrate them also and cause them to be functionally incapacitated. Even though they're still there, they're not working. Okay, nitrating tight junctions. And you know what nitrates tight junctions the best? Fructose. So you're actually leading to the leaky gut with more and more sugar because the tight junctions are not working. And they're not working transiently, so you can't see it when you do a biopsy, like you can with celiac. And then finally, the third barrier is the immunologic barrier. And they are the Th17 cells that are in the Peyer's patches and strewn throughout the entire intestine. And they secrete a cytokine called IL-17. And when you eat a regular diet, a real food diet, or you eat a ketogenic diet, with high fat, those Th17 cells and the IL-17 are fine. They're there. Okay. Yeah, you'll absorb more fat on the ketogenic diet, sure, and your LDL will go up. That's all true. But your intestinal barrier will stay intact. But the minute you add sugar, the minute you turn that high-fat diet into a cafeteria diet, okay, now those Th17 cells are all gone. They've been replaced with Th1 cells, and the IL-17 has gone way down, and now you've got broaching of that immunological barrier. So 3 different barriers: physical, biochemical, immunological, and they're all potentially undoable. And the one thing that undoes all of them is sugar. Again, a major reason why sugar's a problem.
Yeah.
Not just because of the liver effects, but because of the gut effects.
Right. And specifically, we're talking about added sugars.
Added sugars, right. So the sugar in fruit, it's in a matrix and there's loads of fiber. And the amount of sugar is offset by the amount of fiber in the whole fruit. So the rule is eat your fruit, don't drink it.
Yeah. So the question would be, how do you tell your patients to eat?
The grocery store is it's a disaster area. It's hard to navigate the grocery store.
Right.
Because basically there's problems in everything.
Yeah.
And how do you figure out what the problems are? You can't even figure it out from reading the side of the package. That's the problem. Because it's not what's in the food, it's what's been done to the food. And they don't put that on the label. So the label's basically useless. And I've been railing against the food label for a decade now. That we need a complete overhaul of the entire concept of the food label. And, the FDA has not, bitten on that yet. They're thinking about it, but, they haven't bitten. So the question is there a way to navigate the grocery store so that you can actually manage this task in an effective way? And the answer is yes, there is. A set of colleagues, Wolfram Alderson and Andreas Kornstadt, and I have been working for years now on a method for being able to navigate the American grocery store. It is on your computer. It's called Perfect, Perfect. You can find it at http://perfect.co, not com, co, perfect.co. And remember, it's FACT, not FECT. It's not perfect, it's perfect. Okay. And what it does is when you call it up, it will show you all of the items in your grocery store. So 40,000 to 80,000 items in your grocery store. And what you can do is you can apply a set of filters on that based on your metabolic needs and your metabolic profile. So if you have metabolic syndrome, you want all the stuff that's metabolically healthy. It will screen out all the stuff that is metabolically unhealthy. Let's say you're looking for Nova 1 through Nova 3. It will screen out all the Nova 4 items and basically not let you see them. So it'll take your number from 40,000 down to 10,000 because 75% of the things will be screened out. Let's say you have a gluten allergy. You can screen for all the gluten-free items. Let's say you have kidney stones. You can screen for oxalate. You can basically, let's say you want to be vegan. You'll show you only the vegan items. And there you can then build your recipes. You can build your pantry based on things that you know are good for you.
So they'll have like specific brands on there?
Yes, it's taken straight from the SKUs of the store. So it has whatever the store has.
Well, that's very useful. Again, that's Perfect, Perfect.co. I just looked it up. So I'm definitely going to look at that. Thoughts on, obviously you mentioned keto diet, and a lot of people find a lot of benefit from keto diet. There's a lot of people who are doing carnivore diet as well.
Yes.
And they feel great. They feel, maybe even their labs are showing that they're metabolically healthy. If you have any concerns about those, what would those be?
The short answer is it's not for everybody. So 1 in 500 people have familial hypercholesterolemia. They have a problem in cholesterol metabolism. The people who have high total cholesterol, high LDL, and we're talking about like in the 300 range, okay? They probably have a problem with their LDL receptor. They probably need a low-fat diet. So for them, a ketogenic diet is not a good idea. There are also people with hyperlipoproteinemia type 5, okay, which is hyperchylomicronemia. They also should not be on a ketogenic or a carnivore diet. There are people with gout where meat's going to be an issue because of the high purine content, which in uric acid in of itself is a metabolic toxin because it inhibits the enzyme CPT1, carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1, which is the enzyme that regenerates carnitine, which is the shuttle mechanism that the mitochondria use to get the fatty acids into the mitochondria for its own purposes, to be able to split it up into 2 carbon fragments so it can be burned into and generate ATP. So there are certain groups of patients that probably should not be on a ketogenic or carnivore or, high fat, low carb diet. Okay. But the majority of people in the country will actually do quite well on it. and could be on it if they wanted to be on it. Here's the problem with the diet. If you are left to your own devices and you just say, I'm going to be on a ketogenic diet, I'm going to start it today, okay? And you're going to be very fastidious when you start. And you're going to be very, very, cognizant of what you're doing. And you'll actually go ahead and get into ketogenesis. Although, because your enzymes in your body have to turn on in order to be able to metabolize those ketones, and it takes about a week, you might not feel so good during that week. And if you don't feel so good during that week, you might introduce a little carbohydrate into your diet anyway, to try to take the edge off. Well, then you're not on a ketogenic diet and you're not generating ketones, because the more carbohydrate that goes into your diet, the more insulin, and therefore the less ketones. So if you're just doing it on your own and you're not monitoring yourself, the chances that you'll actually get ketogenic are pretty slim. And we know from studies that have been done in the literature that if you're basically not supervised on a ketogenic diet and you have no method for monitoring your ketones, whether it be blood or urine or breath, okay, you're going to regress to the mean by 2 months. And then you won't be on a high-fat, low-carb diet. You will be on a high-fat, medium-carb diet. And a high-fat, medium-carb diet is like the worst diet. That's like the worst diet, because that's the diet that doesn't generate the benefits of the fat and generates the insulin that's going to cause the problems also. So if you're going to do a ketogenic or a carnivore diet, you have to be very fastidious. And most people are not.
Do you get concerned at all about sort of I know you mentioned fiber, some of the other things that we need, and obviously, particularly with the carnivore diet, I wonder how possible that is to actually get some of these other.
Yeah, people ask me all the time, if you say fiber is so important, why is the carnivore diet okay? And the answer is because the carnivore diet still generates a lot of butyrate. And so you're still getting the postbiotic effect even without the fiber. Okay. And so you can mitigate some of that by being on a carnivore diet. So there are, workarounds. And I'm not against the carnivore diet. I'm not for it either. I'm not for any diet. The only diet I'm for is a real food diet. Okay. A non-ultra processed food diet. That's the only diet I've ever actually staken my, reputation on. And I think I've been borne out, 1,000 times over. If you want to be on a carnivore diet, I think you can. I think you have to be a little careful. There are, certain things you still need. So you might want to take a vitamin supplement, a multivitamin supplement, along with that to, make sure you get the things that you do need. If you want to be on a vegan diet, you can be on a vegan diet. But to be honest with you, you need the omega-3s. And the omega-3s you only get from marine life, EPA and DHA. And so you can, take fish oil supplements, but then you're not on a vegan diet because you're eating fish.
That's right.
So, it gets a little complicated.
I guess the last question I would have along that lines too is the emphasis on mitochondria. What do you think of some of the mitochondrial supplements, and if they're useful or not?
Well, so the question is, do they get to the mitochondria? That's the question. Do they get to the mitochondria? And I will be very honest with you, most of them don't. Like, for instance, CoQ10. CoQ10 does not get to the mitochondria. So it sounds good. Yes, your mitochondria need CoQ10, but they're not getting it from the supplement because they're not getting to where they need to go. And the studies actually show that. So you can look at lipoic acid and chromium and all sorts of things that they say they improve mitochondrial function, and they don't. All right. Having said that, and full disclosure, I am an advisor to this nutraceutical company. So take this, with a grain of salt. I'm not selling, but nonetheless, I have looked at the data, carefully. A colleague of mine who is a medicinal biochemist, worked for GlaxoSmithKline for 35 years, started his own nutraceutical company, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Sandeep Dugar, brilliant guy, saw this issue and was very fascinated by the data that was in the literature on green tea and dark chocolate and guarana, and said, well, okay, so what's in those that everybody is raving so much about online? And the answer is it's a nutraceutical. It's a polyphenol, and it's called epicatechin. Epicatechin. All right? Now, the data on epicatechin are very interesting when you actually look at this polyphenol. What does it do? Epicatechin binds, by the way, it is absorbed and it does get to where it needs to go, and it binds to a protein in the cell called IF1. And IF1 then sits on top of the enzyme ATP synthase in electron transport chain 5, okay, which actually makes the ATP. Now, you're probably aware, Buck, that that enzyme is a molecular motor, and it spins in either direction.
Mm-hmm.
If it spins clockwise, it's an ATP synthase. You make ATP. If it spins counterclockwise, it's an ATP ACE, and you use up ATP. So getting it to spin in the right direction is super important. And there are things that will make it spin in the wrong direction, like, for instance, fever, because you're trying to generate heat. So you want to expend the ATP so that it goes off as heat when you're trying to generate a fever during inflammation. Right? So the goal is to make it spin clockwise only. So the epicatechin will sit on the IF1, and the IF1 will sit on the ATP synthase, and will only spin in the correct direction. And you can actually increase the amount of ATP generated by 300-fold by doing this. And we know that the epicatechin actually gets to where it needs to go. And so Dr. Dugar has, over the years, done 3 separate double-blind placebo-controlled trials, one in diabetes, one in heart disease, and one in Becker's muscular dystrophy, and shown improvements in all 3 of them with no side effects.
Wow.
So this might be good.
Yeah, I mean, would you also expect maybe an improvement in, some of the like in fasting insulin levels, things like that?
Yes, absolutely. And so we see that as well. So one of the reasons why I'm an advisor to the company, there are some other reasons as well. If your audience is interested, you can find this stuff. It's called Mitocatalyst E, and you can find it at Blue Oak Nutraceuticals, blueoaknx.com. The point is that people are on this. People are looking for how to improve mitochondrial health. And, this to me is the holy grail. This is what needs to happen. It has to happen at the personal level, and it has to happen at the societal level, which means it has to happen in Washington. So we're working on it, is what I can tell you.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Lustig. Lots of information here. I'm going to have to go back and listen to it myself a couple times. But that's always a sign of a good show. The latest book, of course, also is Metabolical. Obviously, we have a few websites here that we've talked about as well. Thank you so much, and I'd love to have you on again sometime.
Been my pleasure. Thanks very much, Buck.